Please help me welcome to the DEBx stage, Judi Price.
Have you noticed as human beings that many of us have an obsession with being perfect and playing the perfect game of life? We try to avoid errors in our lives because some have painful consequences. Maybe you've experienced this too. Maybe a bad choice in a relationship, or you loaned money to someone and you didn't get it back. Maybe a career choice that didn't quite work out, or you got a speeding ticket and you knew you were speeding. Some choices have larger consequences than others, but all leave us judging ourselves. In my early 20s, I married, and shortly thereafter, I went through a divorce. This left me a single mother, finishing my college degree. It was an extremely difficult time in my life. Although I had a beautiful daughter, I was now alone, I was scared, and I was going through the motions of survival. And the first time in my life, I had to figure out things all on my own. But that wasn't the worst part. One of the painful consequences was I was constantly talking to myself, saying things like, "How could you be so stupid, so naive, so trusting?" I was constantly judging myself. I felt like I had a big sign on my back that said, "Divorced with a child." All I knew was to bury the pain, forget it ever happened, and so I graduated and I moved on with my career. A few years later, I married a wonderful man. I had 3 more beautiful children. And for the next 20 years, we were busy raising our family. On the outside, it looked like everything was great. On the inside, I was dying. There were so many judgments that lingered in my mind. There wasn't space for me to really connect with my husband. The judgments, they were taking up all of the space. Whenever things didn't go right, I would hear those familiar judgments. "You are so stupid. You are so naive. You are too trusting." Those words were like an invisible wall that separated me from the rest of the world. This was until 2009, when God led me back to school to get a master's degree in spiritual psychology. Well, the way this curriculum worked was everything we studied, we applied to our own personal lives. This is where I discovered compassionate self-forgiveness. When it was first introduced, I thought it was a bit hokey and it didn't really make sense, and I wasn't really sure, what it was about. But I knew I was supposed to forgive other people, but why would I have to forgive myself? I thought forgiveness happened out there. But since it was a big part of my studies, I dove into the topic of self-forgiveness for the next 2 years. And here's what I discovered. Compassionate self-forgiveness is a most powerful healing process. It involves experiencing love and compassion for oneself, regardless of your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. It allows you to dissolve disturbances inside you through releasing judgments and surrendering to love, because that is your true nature. Said another way, self-forgiveness is truly healing medicine for the soul. I call it a form of emotional hygiene. You know how important physical hygiene is for the body, brushing your teeth, and just think about it if you never took a shower and how stinky your body would get. Well, compassionate self-forgiveness is emotional hygiene for the soul. One of the foundational principles of spiritual psychology is that whenever there is a disturbance in your internal peace, there is an opportunity for healing and for growth. As I was doing my work, I started to see the disturbances in my life, judgments, Lots of judgments that were still there, impacting me, impacting my marriage, how I related to my husband. As I continued to look at my life, what came forward was my past. And I realized the judgments I was holding on to were still there. I could feel them in my body. In class, my professor would often say, healing is the application of loving to the parts inside of you that hurt. Well, I knew I hurt, and I was not loving myself at all. In fact, I was judging myself. Constant judgmental conversations going on in my mind. Saying things to myself I would never say to someone else, like, you idiot, why did you get married so young? Why are you so naive? Why are you so trusting? As I began looking at forgiveness for myself, the 22-year-old Judi showed up, and all the judgments I had about her, they came forward. And that beautiful young woman that made a choice, I could see she was doing the best that she could with the knowledge that she had. I applied forgiveness by placing my hand on my heart and saying out loud to her, I forgive myself for judging myself as if I am naive, stupid, trusting. As I forgave myself, my world, it started to change. And I was able to apply loving to the parts inside of me that hurt. I applied self-forgiveness to my younger self. It didn't mean that I forgot about what happened, but I was releasing the judgments that I had about what happened. There was a grace that came forward that I didn't know existed that I was able to give to my 22-year-old self. I couldn't change the past, but I could release the judgments that were holding me hostage. My heart began to open more fully to love, and I began loving her, and I began loving myself. And because of this, I began loving my husband more deeply than I had ever experienced before. There was this opening for sharing, for loving, and experiencing our communion in a fuller way. And as I continued to forgive myself, I noticed in my marriage that arguments were shorter. Issues were resolved quickly. Apologies came with velocity, and loving returned so much faster. Even my son said, I'm sure glad my parents got their act together. It truly was miraculous. Look, you know you have judgments about yourself. So where can you apply forgiveness? Loving to the parts inside of you that hurt. Self-forgiveness is access to healing, and healing does not happen without some form of forgiveness. But knowing about forgiveness doesn't make it happen, because we think it happens in the mind. Forgiveness, it actually happens in the heart. Forgiveness is freeing up and putting to better use the energy once consumed by holding grudges, harboring resentments, and nursing unhealed wounds. Those unhealed wounds, they are in the heart, not in the mind. When practicing self-forgiveness, you provide an endless capacity to understand and accept yourself. By putting your hand on your heart and releasing your judgments through forgiveness, you provide love to the parts of you inside that hurt, because those judgments, they're not who you are. By finding forgiveness in your heart, you will rise to a higher level of self-esteem and well-being, because forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. Thank you.